So moving on, we're still in chapter 4 on the socialization process. We're now going to start talking about social class. So you might have remembered that we already talked about that socialization is the process of learning about your culture and picking up on symbols and behaviors that are particular, and your culture really influences how you learn and what you learn. Well, part of your culture is about what social class you belong to. So, what is a social class? Social class is a segment of population whose members have relatively similar share of society's desirable goods and who shares attitudes, values, norms, and lifestyle. So your social class, and this is the picture I have up here with the upper class, middle, that triangle where the underclass is at the bottom. That's what I want you to think about when you think about social class. And each level is a different class. So social class is usually thought up to be divided based upon income. So again, it's a segment of the populations whose members have similar attitudes, values, and norms, and lifestyle and resources. So when we hone in on resources, I want you to think about income. Think about the types of goods and services, lifestyle that someone has. If you are an upper class person, you drive very nice vehicles, you live in an affluent neighborhood, your children might go to private school. There might be an expectation that your child will be a lawyer, a doctor, a CEO, might go to an Ivy League school like Harvard or Yale. And then you can contrast that with someone maybe who is in a working class, that your family does blue collar work, or your family just makes enough to make ends meet. And instead of having really nice cars and living in an affluent neighborhood, your family might live in an apartment or a low income housing, or you may not even own a vehicle. You may take public transportation. Your children, if they're lucky to go to school, they wouldn't even have an option to go to an Ivy League school. So people that are in different social classes, each class shares similar attitudes, norms, lifestyle, and resources. And you can really understand that. So whenever I was growing up, I watched the show Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and Will Smith, the main character, he lived in a city with his mother. She didn't have a lot of money, and then he moved to Bel-Air with his uncle, who was a lawyer. And that culture shock he had between going from a very working poor, not a lot of money, to now living in an upper class home and going to a private school. You can see the difference in resources. You can see the different norms and values that each family portrayed. So just remember that not only does the society you live in shape what things you are learning and how you're socialized, but also your social class that you have also shapes that as well. So another part of society that shapes people's socialization process are things called total institutions. These are places where individuals are separated from the rest of society and people are controlled and manipulated by those in power. The goal of total institutions is to change a person. So some examples of total institutions might be a mental hospital, or going into the military, or being put in prison. The usual goal is to shape the individual and change them. So we know that if you're in a mental hospital or if you're in prison, there's something wrong in your life and you're trying to make improvements. And usually going into a mental hospital or going into a prison is something that is involuntary. You don't really want to be there. Most people that go into the military, which we could debate this as well, sign up and are willing to go. Think about, I've never been in boot camp. Usually I ask the class if any of you have been in boot camp, if you've ever watched a movie, or actually my brother went through boot camp and I got to hear from his experience. The purpose of going through boot camp is to change the individual. Instead of them acting as an individual, they now act as a unit. They act as the military in their platoon, in whatever they term their group to be, and change the person into thinking more as a group and not acting as such an individual. In boot camp, they shave their heads, they give them all the same clothes, they make them work out, long, strenuous workouts. The whole goal is to change the individual to make them a soldier instead of just a person. So the question I have here at the bottom is, does it work? When we send people to mental hospitals, does it work? Is the outcome always the same? Well, I know from working with people who have gone to mental hospitals, sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it makes the people worse. They go into these situations, and if their stay isn't long enough, or if they don't go to an appropriate facility, sometimes it makes them worse off than they started. And we all know that the recidivism rates of prisons is too high. Just a fun fact, the number one thing that decreases recidivism or the likelihood that people will go back to jail is education. So it's very important that part of the process of rehabilitation in prison systems is not only education, but counseling and assistance that way. So, how do total institutions work? Well, first, they go through a process of desocialization. This is where people let go of old norms, values, and attitudes and behaviors. And usually, this is not done voluntary. Okay. So, think of the desocialization process of going through boot camp, being screamed at, being punished for doing things wrong, made to run and exercise. Usually, that's not a fun thing that people aren't wanting to do. Think about going to prison where they strip away all of your goods and take away all of your clothes and give you different clothes to wear, and you're punished. It's a process of letting go of your old ways of behaving, things that you wear, to make that change. And then what happens is the re-socialization process, where they've kind of broken you down, and now they're going to teach you new ways, new values, new attitudes, new behaviors to make that change happen and produce a new person. Another type of socialization is called anticipatory socialization. This is a voluntary change where people are preparing for something new. So think about when you start college. Think about when you start a new job. I have some pictures here, some local high schools. I remember whenever I was starting high school and I was a freshman, I was very nervous. I tried to do everything that I could to prepare for that first day of high school. You always buy the school supplies, but I talked with my friends on the phone. We coordinated where we were going to meet up at the school, what we were going to wear. We were trying to get ready to start this new journey. You were probably the same before you started school at Kaskaskia College. You got your books, you registered for classes, you made sure you took your placement tests. You might have come to campus early to figure out where your classes were. All of those things, you're trying to get ready for your new situation. I remember when I started working at Kaskaskia College, I talked to people who worked there. I went on their website and tried to read as much as possible. Before my interview, I wanted to be prepared, but it's also part about learning about the new culture that you're going to start attending or start joining. You want to try and learn as much as possible to make the transition to this new thing that you're doing as smooth as possible.